The movie Wicked has been the source of controversy ever since its release in late November. While the story and music is widely loved by many people, there is one element of the film that has received an overwhelming output of opinions.
I find the movie at times unwatchable. The way that this movie is colored makes me want to hurt myself. I do not like how the color looks at all. It's totally desaturated and I don't understand why.
Maybe you're one of those people who had similar thoughts. Because of this, I wanted to do a video addressing the topic. And regardless of what you think of the color, why did it get such a strong reaction from audience members? If we want to understand why people had such a reaction to Wicked, I think we have to go back and ask what has been the culture of storytelling around Oz. We'll get back to talking about Wicked as a standalone film in a moment, but hang with me here. I think we need to set the foundation of how the story has been told in the past. The original Wizard of Oz film was released in 1939. Almost exactly 85 years before Wicked's film adaptation. And on release, nearly universally loved by audiences. This was right during an explosion of the use of color film during the golden age of Hollywood. Now, this wasn't the first time that color was used in film. Occasionally I'll see that bad info floating about on the internet. But The Wizard of Oz does exist at a period in history where audiences are getting to see for the first time the true power and beauty of what color film can produce. For reference, 1939, when The Wizard of Oz was released. That same year, Gone with the Wind was released. For many people, these films were some of the very first times that people got to see this level of nuance and maturity with color reproduction in motion picture stories, at least at this scale and at this budget level. Something that fascinates me about this time in film's history is how color films existed right beside black and white films. Doing a film in color was an immensely costly endeavor, so it was saved for very select projects. Now, there were still amazing films being produced at this time without color. In 1941, which for the record is 2 years after The Wizard of Oz, we see the release of Citizen Kane. And that following year, in 1942, we see the release of Casablanca. This is one of the reasons why I think the use of the tinted black and white in the opening of Wizard of Oz is such a beautiful idea. Audiences at the time were used to seeing black and white films. Even tinted black and white had been used for many years by this point. Color now is such a given, right? Whenever we see something in black and white, it really stands out. But this was not necessarily the same for audiences back in the 30s. The impact of the transition from black and white into 3-strip Technicolor would have hit that much harder as Dorothy enters Oz. The storytelling of that transition, it made such a cultural impact that even people who haven't seen the film know of that color transformation. Now, this isn't the only film that tells the story of Oz, but nothing quite had that same level of cultural impact as the original film until 2003, when the stage musical of Wicked premiered with the music of Stephen Schwartz. Now, on stage, we really don't have that same ability to color grade like modern digital filmmaking. But what we do have is we have art design and lighting. So what do we see in the marketing and the visual language around this stage production? We see strong, expressive, multicolored choices in lighting, darker stages, and the use of bold colors in costumes, set pieces, and the visual design. So this is normally part of a workshop that I teach, but you're getting it for free today, so congratulations. Often when we make decisions about a film's color, there are 3 elements being balanced. The first thing we need to consider is the technical limitations that we are working with. For example, colorists have to work with the footage they are given. I've certainly worked on projects where there was some mistake on set, like some light shifted between days, and now a light fixture is in a little bit of a different spot than it was before. Now, digital color tools are good, but we're still not quite at the point where I can just move where a light fixture is emitting from. In the case of Wicked, if the creative team wanted more saturation levels, can our tools increase saturation? Absolutely. The colorist Jill Bogdanowicz is a wildly talented artist. She was the colorist on The Joker, a number of the John Wick films. She's done Marvel projects, Star Wars films, among many others. The next part of the decision triangle is audience viewing devices. And not enough people give this point credit. The device that you watch a movie on has a huge impact on your viewing experience. Don't think that just because you go to a movie theater, suddenly you get a perfect experience. I've heard stories from behind the scenes of certain theaters that they do things like reduce the projector's brightness just to save on the life of their units. I have an anecdotal story about something like this happening to me when I went and saw Wicked. So I saw the film twice in theaters. Once in a normal local theater screen, and the second time in a Dolby Cinema theater. During my first watch in the local theater, I saw some weird stuff going on at the end of the song Popular. If you remember, near the end of the song, there's this big swing towards pink in the grade, and it's some of the boldest color that we get in the film. But something looked actively wrong during that first theater visit. When that pink shift happened, it was almost like the pinks got dark and muddy. It was strange enough that I felt like it couldn't have been an intentional choice. And wouldn't you know it, when I went to see the film in a Dolby Cinema environment, the scene looked amazing. Exactly how I imagined it should have been. So something was off during my first visit. Now, audience viewing devices at times explain why people have a bad experience watching a film, but the critique of the film broadly feeling too desaturated was common enough that I don't credit this to be the issue. The final part of the triangle is culture. And when I say culture, I mean that art and films more specifically, they don't magically come out of nowhere. By the way, I don't know who first created this decision triangle, but Walter Valpato taught it to me first, so credit where credit's due. When we think of what a film should look like, or what a good film looks like, it's a combination of lots of personal preference that has been shaped by the art that we've experienced before. Art isn't created in a vacuum. This is true for original films, but it's also especially true for a film like Wicked that isn't an isolated project. It is building off of over 80 years of storytelling around the world of Oz. And Wicked isn't simply in the extended universe of Oz, like some new Disney Plus TV show, but rather it is intersecting with and telling the backstory to one of the most iconic films of the golden age of Hollywood. And it is a direct adaptation of a wildly successful stage play. But here's the thing. None of what I've just said is fresh news to the creative team behind the movie. So it's worth asking, what was the original goal for color on the film? One important question we should ask when evaluating color is, what was the target? What was this goal that they were aiming towards? Director John Chu did an interview with the Globe and Mail where he was directly asked about the color on the film. Here's what was said. Going back to The Wizard of Oz, what made that movie so special was how it leaned into the glorious Technicolor for its storytelling, really emphasizing the ruby slippers, the yellow brick road, the emerald city, etc. Color was essential to that story. Now, Wicked is a little desaturated except for the pink glow during the Popular number. Talk to me about the aesthetic. And John replies, I mean, there's color all over it. I think what we wanted to do was immerse people into Oz, to make it a real place. Because if it was a fake place, if it was a dream in someone's mind, then the real relationships and the stakes that these two girls are going through wouldn't feel real. It's also presented in a way we have not experienced Oz before. It's been a matte painting, it's been a video game digital world, but for us, I want to feel the dirt. I want to feel the wear and tear of it. And I think this is an excellent goal. One of the reasons why I love movies like the original Star Wars film is that it manages to feel futuristic, but also like it's existed for a really long time. Like there's this long history that we're entering into. Things are dirty, dusty, broken down, especially in Luke's life when we first meet him. Now, I also tried to find details from cinematographer Alice Brooks, who has done lots of work that I love. She recently did In the Heights and Tick, Tick, Boom, which were beautifully done. But from the searching I did, I struggled to find interviews getting as deep as I was hoping for. In an interview on Marie Claire, I found some excerpts saying, we wanted Oz to look like no other Oz anyone's ever seen before. And actually, our movie not to look like anything anyone's seen before. We're definitely not a movie that's on trend. I started doing color tests because we were like, okay, we get to create our own version of what Technicolor is, what the 2024 version of Technicolor is. I wish she spoke more on this. I'm very intrigued to know what she means by a 2024 version of Technicolor, because my brain automatically jumps to some sort of modern take on film emulation. But what I associate with film emulation is not where the film ended up. So I would love to know more. With that as a framework, it's also helpful to hear what the colorist's perspective is. Because while the director and cinematographer set the vision, it's the colorist who has to carry it out. So here's an interview with Jill Bogdanowicz on postperspective.com. Was the 1939 classic The Wizard of Oz, with its rich 3-strip Technicolor process, an inspiration for the look? Joe replies, actually not at all. John very much wanted a different, more modern look. Alice shot with Arri 65, and when you bring that into P3 or other display color spaces, you get a look with a lot of detail, but which is a little bit softer than most of the other cameras being used. It's not exactly pastel, but it's definitely not the kind of intense, saturated color you think about in The Wizard of Oz. This process definitely has its own look, and John wanted to hold on to that. And that's what I find fascinating about this whole discussion. If what we just looked over in these interviews is the target for the look of the film, I would say the direction starts to make a lot more sense. But there's an issue we run into. My mind keeps thinking, and maybe you're here with me as well, that most audience members weren't privy to those conversations going into the film. This is where the artistic vision meets the audience reception. So there's lots of personal opinions here, but I wanted to walk through some thoughts about the film and provide some perspective. Let's start with what, in my opinion, the film does well. First and foremost, I think the creative team was very successful getting audiences to resonate with Elphaba. And one of the philosophies a lot of colorists share is that when we balance an image, we balance it for the skin tone of the hero of the story, or at least the main hero of a shot. And while green is not normally the skin tone that we're balancing for, I thought that consistently throughout the film, Elphaba looked excellent. They absolutely managed to pull off the green skin while still looking remarkably authentic. The scenes at night I also find to be consistently some of my favorite visual moments in the film. The storytelling around Elphaba's parents during the opening looks strong. The scene where Elphaba and Fiyero release the lion cub is another good one. The scenes surrounding something bad is happening in Oz I also liked. Some other wins in my book was the Emerald City in general. I thought One Short Day was fun. The Oz throne room with that big mechanical Oz contraption looked great. And I love the sequence surrounding the performance of the song Sentimental Man. I just thought it was really enjoyable. Did you notice anything about my favorite moments? Most of them happen towards the latter half of the film. When I see people commenting on the desaturated look of Wicked, a lot of times it's referencing some of the earlier parts of the film. I feel like most commonly the areas I see are the opening Munchkin Land celebration, kind of the entrance into Shiz University sequences, and then Dancing Through Life. So let's ask the question, why? What seems to be the source of people's complaints? The first thing that stands out to me is the highlights. The daylight in these sequences reads very bright white and maybe even a touch clinical. When the highlights are so clean and almost neutral, I feel like that we lose some of that warmth that I desire in this world. Films that use stronger film emulation approaches tend to have fairly present split toning, and split toning is where the highlights are naturally warmed up and then the shadows are cooled a bit. Maybe that's an element that people subconsciously want more of in this look. Another element is obviously the discussion on saturation. When we think about saturation, there's a number of ways to go about adding saturation. Sometimes we use a line as an illustration, where the bottom left is representing the part of the image with no saturation, and the top right are the highly saturated colors. Sometimes all an image needs is a bump of saturation to the less pronounced areas of the image. We give the lower saturated elements a bit of a boost, but leave the higher saturations where they already are. Now, this is a color response often used when wanting to have a more colorful image, but not wanting to go crazy with the stuff that's already popping in the frame. I would be very interested to see what this film would look like with a saturation bump done in a similar way. But that's not the only way to think about saturation. What really is the biggest difference is the base level of saturation in the art design of the world. Now, I'm not talking about the color grading right now, but rather how much color is there on set to begin with. And you know what's interesting? Another theme with my favorite visual moments in the film is that those scenes tend to have a higher base level of saturation in the elements on set. If I were to pick the single biggest item that determined which scenes I preferred versus not, this would be the primary factor. The night scenes are often providing us more blue to work with, which gives us this nice foundation of colorfulness to work off of. And those warm practical lights in those scenes give some motivated color contrast that helps give us a more dynamic image. In the Emerald City, we once again have a location with loads of color to begin with in both the sets and costumes. Now you could still say you want more saturation in the grade, and that's totally fine. But these scenes don't jump out to me nearly as much as some of the scenes earlier in the film. Obviously, it's not totally fair to compare the frames of Wicked to The Wizard of Oz, since the creative team explicitly wasn't aiming for it. But I think you can see how in the original film, there was a strong level of color to work with consistently inside the frame. No amount of turning up the saturation dial can give you colors that weren't there to begin with. So, is Wicked's color bad? Admittedly, that question is probably way too broad. Let's try a few different questions to get at an answer. How about this? Did the artistic team achieve their vision? It's obvious that they're a very talented team, and now that you've heard their vision for the film, did they hit their target? Secondly, do you agree with the vision for color? I think it's helpful to separate these two because it's very possible that if you didn't like Wicked's color, it might be because you had a different target for what the film should look like. Third and finally, did the visual choices further the story? Did they make you feel like Oz was more real, authentic? Did you buy the characters more? Or do you feel like it distracted you from the story? So what lessons can we learn from this discussion for our own films in the future? And please note, this isn't some big critique of Wicked. I love the film. It very easily competes for one of my favorite movie musicals in the last few decades. So I'm in no way questioning the talents or the skills of the artists involved. Rather, what can we learn from the discussion happening around the film? First, color grading isn't an isolated field. It's not like being a painter where we can just create something out of nothing, whole cloth. What we do is a continuation of the work of hundreds of artists that have already worked on the film. Second, our stories exist within a culture of films. Now, you may not be making a prequel or a sequel. Maybe your story is something completely original. But a look for a film isn't something that's created out of thin air in post-production. You very likely have no idea how much what looks good in a film is influenced by visual trends and references from art that you've grown up on. It shapes and defines what we think of as a beautiful image. Finally, when breaking from norms, consider MAYA. It's an acronym that means most advanced yet acceptable. Not all art is meant to entertain mass audiences, but if you are creating art for others and not simply for yourself, realize that our choices still need to serve the audience's experience of the story. If what we do gets in the way of that or distracts, it's worth considering other options. By the way, one of the things I enjoy doing when analyzing films is pulling these palette frames. If you want the ones I've created in this film, I've put them on my free resource page. You can find that link in the description. So what do you think about all this? Make sure to let me know down in the comments. Also, I haven't done a lot of this video essay-like content in the past, so make sure to let me know if you like it. All right, I'll see you in the next one.